How momentous is this decision?
The decision is really a big deal. It's going to affect the United States' relationships with almost every country in the world, and some of its closest allies and international partners, the environmental community. Everyone is sort of stunned right now because, I mean, remember, this is an agreement that 190 countries signed. There are virtually no countries, there's just one or two.
I mean, Syria and Nicaragua
Right.
are the only
Yeah,
countries
exactly.
who did not sign on to this.
So the United States has just withdrawn from something that the entire world had agreed to.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
Absolutely.
We saw business leaders advocating for the White House to stay in this agreement, including from the energy sector. And we even saw people taking out
major oil
full-page ads
yeah.
in the Wall Street Journal saying, stay in, hoping to catch the eyes of not just influencers, but President Trump himself. What's their logic?
That's why this is going to be so controversial, what the president has done, because corporate America was basically for the Paris Agreement. But President Trump went out and said the Paris Agreement is bad for the economy. And when he did that, he did it based on a premise that I think is going to be heavily disputed. He seemed to be describing not the Paris Agreement itself, but President Obama's pledge under the Paris Agreement. The problem with taking that approach is that a lot of legal experts will say, well, the United States doesn't have to stick to President Obama's pledge. The United States could revise its pledge. The Paris Agreement is flexible, voluntary. It doesn't tell any country what it has to do. And so, you know, I think that the world would have accommodated the United States having a President Trump pledge the Paris Agreement. So the reason that you then had to leave seems sort of unclear.
You know, Chris, this is a really important point. The Paris Agreement doesn't just say every country cut your emissions by X% or to these limits. It allowed countries to set their own goals.
Exactly,
and
that's the
say,
fundamental
here's what
structure.
I can commit to.
The fundamental structure is that countries, it's a bottom-up agreement, not a top-down. So you don't say, oh, China, you're this % of emissions, therefore you cut this much. In the United States, you're this %, you have to cut this much, and then we'll get to our goal. No, it says everybody say what you can do and commit to doing your best, and then we'll meet again in regular time intervals every so many years, see where we are, and then we're going to ask you to try harder. That's essentially the structure. It's also worth pointing out that legally, you can't just withdraw from the Paris Agreement with a snap of your finger. It takes 3 years until you can actually withdraw once you've joined the agreement and it's come into force, which it did right in November, right around the time of the election. So for 3 years you can't actually get out. And then there's a 1-year waiting period. So the actual exit legally would be the time of the next U.S. presidential election.
So we're looking at like November 2020.
Almost exactly on the day, very close to the day. I forget exactly which day it is. So there's a long process, so you could imagine that this is a negotiating strategy. But it's hard to see why every country in the world would reassemble. It's a big production to create an international agreement, and they're all already working to implement this one. And they would also just argue back, no, you just should change your pledge to the Paris Agreement, not get us all to renegotiate an entirely new agreement. It would probably look exactly the same, but you would just make a different pledge. So why not?
So you'd have your part of the bargain be different, but everyone else is still coming to the table.
Why not change your position rather than changing 190 countries, trying to get them all to agree on something again?